Welcome to Ancient Relics Keeper. Uncover hidden histories, lost artifacts, and ancient mysteries. Join us as we explore the past secrets. Subscribe and dive into history's untold stories. In the early chapters of the Bible, there is a strange and cryptic passage that speaks of a time when giants walked the earth. They were called the Nephilim, mighty beings born from a forbidden union between heavenly figures and human women. For centuries, this story has been dismissed as pure myth. But what if there's more to this legend? Could these tales be a distorted memory of a real, ancient race? Our investigation into the reality of ancient giants begins not in a dusty archaeological dig or a remote, unexplored cave, but within the pages of one of the most influential and widely read books in human history, the Bible. It is here, tucked away in the early, primal chapters of the book of Genesis, that we find a strange, cryptic, and deeply unsettling passage. It's a brief but explosive verse that has puzzled theologians, inspired mythmakers, and fueled speculation for thousands of years. It speaks of a time before the Great Flood, a shadowy, antediluvian age, when the boundaries between heaven and earth were dangerously blurred. And it introduces us to a mysterious and powerful race of beings known as the Nephilim. The passage in question is Genesis, chapter 6, verse 4. It reads, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown." Let's pause and break down just how strange and packed with mystery this single verse is. It appears almost as a fragment, a brief, matter-of-fact aside in the larger narrative that is building towards the story of Noah and the flood. The author doesn't seem to feel the need to explain it in great detail, as if assuming the original audience was already familiar with this tradition. First, there is the name itself, Nephilim. The origin of this Hebrew word is hotly debated by scholars, and its translation is key to understanding who these beings were. The most common interpretation comes from the Hebrew root word naphal, which means to fall. Thus, Nephilim is often translated as the fallen ones. This immediately gives the name a sinister and rebellious connotation, suggesting these were beings who had fallen from a higher state of grace. Another interpretation suggests the word means those who cause others to fall, implying they were corrupting agents, leading humanity astray. A third, less common but equally intriguing translation suggests it simply means giants, focusing on their physical stature rather than their moral or spiritual origin. Whatever the precise meaning, the name itself is shrouded in enigma and hints at a story of transgression and power. Next, we have the two groups involved in their creation, the sons of God, Ben-e Ha-Elohim in Hebrew, and the daughters of humans, Benat Ha-Adam. This is the core of the controversy. Who, exactly, were these sons of God? The text is not explicit, and this ambiguity has led to two major, competing interpretations that have existed for centuries. The first, and arguably the most ancient and sensational interpretation, is that the sons of God were literal, divine, or angelic beings. They were members of the heavenly court who, seeing the beauty of human women, were consumed by lust, abandoned their celestial station, and descended to earth to take human wives. This was a profound act of cosmic rebellion, a violation of the sacred order that separated the divine realm from the mortal one. The second interpretation is far more mundane and metaphorical. It arose later, largely as a way to demystify this strange and problematic passage. In this view, the sons of God were not angels, but were simply men from the righteous lineage of Seth, the third son of Adam and Eve. The daughters of humans, in contrast, were women from the corrupt and worldly lineage of Cain, the first murderer. The story, therefore, is not about angels mating with humans, but is a moral allegory about the dangers of intermarriage between the faithful and the ungodly. It's a cautionary tale about how the line of the righteous was corrupted by mixing with the wicked, leading to a generation so sinful that God had to cleanse the world with a flood. While this interpretation avoids the theological problems of angels procreating, many scholars feel it doesn't quite fit the epic and mythic tone of the text. Why would the offspring of such a union be described as heroes of old, men of renown? This brings us to the final part of the verse, the description of the Nephilim themselves. They are called the Jibrim, the mighty ones or heroes. This is the same word used later in the Bible to describe powerful warriors and kings, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. The text says they were men of renown, suggesting they were famous, legendary figures whose exploits were the subject of ancient stories. This description implies they were more than just ordinary humans. They were a hybrid race, possessing a combination of divine power and human form, a generation of demigods who walked the earth in that distant, forgotten age. The verse also adds a tantalizing chronological detail. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. This small phrase is crucial. It suggests that the Nephilim, or the phenomenon that created them, was not completely wiped out by the Great Flood. It implies that they somehow reappeared in the post-flood world, a possibility that sets the stage for their later encounters in the Bible. The Genesis passage is like a door that has been left slightly ajar, giving us only a brief, frustrating glimpse into a much larger and more detailed story. It raises far more questions than it answers. What were the names of these sons of God? What was the nature of their transgression? What did the Nephilim do that made them so renowned? For the answers to these questions, we must turn from the canonical Bible to a collection of other ancient Jewish texts, books that were widely read and respected during the time of Jesus and the early church, but which were ultimately not included in the final version of the Old Testament. The most important of these is the Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch is an ancient apocalyptic text purportedly written by Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, who, according to Genesis, walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. The book is a collection of visions, prophecies, and cosmological secrets revealed to Enoch during his journeys through the heavens. And at its very heart is a vastly expanded and incredibly detailed account of the story of the Nephilim. Where Genesis gives us a single verse, the Book of Enoch gives us entire chapters. It takes the cryptic Genesis passage and blows it up into a full-blown cosmic horror story. According to the Book of Enoch, the sons of God were a specific group of 200 angels known as the Watchers. They were sent by God to watch over humanity in its early days. But from their station in the heavens, they began to look down upon the daughters of men and were consumed by lust. Their leader, an angel named Samiaza, convinced them to band together and make a pact. They descended to earth on Mount Hermon, a real mountain on the border of modern-day Lebanon and Syria, and took human wives for themselves. This was the original sin of the angels, a willful act of rebellion against God's established order. The Book of Enoch then describes what happened next. The Watchers did more than just procreate with human women. They taught their wives and children forbidden knowledge from heaven. One angel, Azazel, taught humanity the art of making swords, knives, and armor, introducing warfare to the world. He taught them how to make cosmetics and jewelry, introducing vanity and seduction. Other angels taught them sorcery, incantations, astrology, and the secrets of the heavens. They essentially gave humanity a premature and corrupting technological and magical advancement, a knowledge they were not ready for. And the offspring of these unions were the Nephilim. The Book of Enoch describes them in terrifying detail. They were not just mighty heroes. They were a race of monstrous giants, some said to be 3,000 cubits an impossibly huge number tall. Their nature was as monstrous as their size. They were possessed by a voracious, insatiable appetite. At first, they consumed all the food produced by humanity. When that was not enough, they turned on humanity itself and began to devour people. The book paints a gruesome picture of a world tormented by these cannibalistic giants. They then turned on each other, drinking blood and eating the flesh of their own kind. The world descended into a nightmare of violence, corruption, and lawlessness, all because of the original sin of the Watchers and the monstrous nature of their giant offspring. The cries of the tormented human race finally reached heaven, and God and the archangels Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel looked down and saw the chaos. The punishment was swift and absolute. The watchers were captured, bound in chains, and cast into a pit of darkness, an abyss in the desert, where they are to be held until the final judgment. And the Nephilim, their hybrid children, were turned against each other in a great war, destroying one another. According to Enoch, the disembodied spirits of these dead giants would remain on earth as evil spirits or demons, continuing to plague humanity until the end of time. And finally, to wash the world clean of all the blood and corruption that the Nephilim had caused, God sent the great flood, saving only Noah and his family to begin humanity anew. The Book of Enoch provides a complete, terrifying, and internally consistent narrative that explains the cryptic verse in Genesis. It gives names to the fallen angels, details their sins, describes the monstrous nature of their offspring, and provides a direct theological reason for the Great Flood. It is a powerful and influential story, and we know it was influential because it is directly quoted in the New Testament, in the Epistle of Jude. This shows that the early Christians were not only familiar with this tradition, but they took it seriously as a part of their understanding of the world's ancient history. The Enochian tradition, with its tale of rebellious angels and monstrous giants, provides the crucial missing context for the Nephilim enigma. But the story doesn't end there. As Genesis 6 verse 4 hinted, the giants were on the earth, also afterward. The story of giants reemerges in the Bible hundreds of years after the flood, during the time of Moses and the Israelite conquest of Canaan. After their exodus from Egypt, the Israelites are poised to enter the Promised Land. Moses sends 12 spies, one from each tribe, to scout the land and report back on its inhabitants and its defenses. When the spies return, 10 of them bring back a terrifying report. They describe Canaan as a land of fortified cities and powerful warriors. But their greatest fear is reserved for a specific group of people they encountered. In the book of Numbers, chapter 13, the spies say, "And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them." This is a stunning moment. The name Nephilim reappears, explicitly linked to a clan known as the Sons of Anak, or the Anakim. The spies' description of feeling like grasshoppers in comparison paints a vivid picture of beings of immense physical stature. Their report strikes such terror into the hearts of the Israelites that they refuse to enter the Promised Land, an act of disobedience for which they are punished with 40 years of wandering in the desert. This wasn't just a fleeting glimpse. The Bible mentions these post-flood giant clans multiple times. Besides the Anakim, there were the Rephaim, the Emim, and the Zamzummim. These were all described as ancient, powerful peoples of great height who had inhabited the lands of Canaan and its surroundings before the Israelites arrived. The biblical text often goes out of its way to note their size. For example, the bed of Og, the king of Bashan, a remnant of the Rephaim, is described as being 9 cubits long over 13 feet. The most famous of all these giants is, of course, Goliath of Gath. The story of David and Goliath is one of the most well-known in the entire Bible. Goliath is described as a champion of the Philistines, a warrior of immense size and strength. The text gives his height as 6 cubits and a span, which translates to over 9 feet tall. He is clad in heavy bronze armor and wields a spear with an iron head that weighed as much as a modern bowling ball. He is presented as a seemingly invincible foe, a monster who terrorizes the entire Israelite army. While many modern scholars suggest his height may have been exaggerated in the telling, the narrative clearly intends for the reader to see him as a literal giant, a descendant of those same ancient, powerful bloodlines that the spies had feared centuries earlier. Goliath is, in a sense, the last echo of the Nephilim in the biblical narrative. So, when we piece together the biblical and extra-biblical evidence, a coherent, if fantastic, story emerges. It begins in a primeval age, with a rebellion of heavenly beings. This rebellion leads to the birth of a hybrid race of powerful, violent giants, the Nephilim, who corrupt the world. They are wiped out in a great war and a global flood, but their lineage or the phenomenon that created them somehow survives or reappears. Centuries later, the descendants of these giants, like the Anakim and the Rephaim, still inhabit the lands of the Near East, terrifying their neighbors with their immense size and strength. The Israelites encounter them, battle them, and eventually, figures like Goliath represent the last vestiges of this mythic race. This is the biblical enigma of the Nephilim. It is a story that weaves through the Old Testament, a persistent tradition of an ancient race of giants who once walked the earth. For believers, it is a literal account of a supernatural history. For historians, it is a fascinating piece of ancient folklore. But for those who search for hidden truths, it is a tantalizing clue, a textual breadcrumb that suggests our ancient past may have been home to beings far stranger and far larger than our conventional history books would have us believe. And it is this possibility that forces us to ask the ultimate question: could there be any physical evidence to support this incredible story? The story of the Nephilim, as told in the Bible and the Book of Enoch, is a powerful and unsettling narrative. It paints a picture of a lost age populated by monstrous giants and fallen angels, a world so strange it feels confined to the realm of myth and theological speculation. For centuries, that is where the story remained. It was a fascinating piece of folklore, a cautionary tale, but not something to be taken as literal history. After all, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and ancient texts, no matter how compelling, are not physical proof. But what if there was more? What if, far from the ancient lands of the Near East, on a different continent, an entirely separate culture preserved a strikingly similar legend? And what if that legend led directly to a dusty cave filled with physical remains that seemed to challenge everything we thought we knew about the people of ancient America? This is where our investigation takes a dramatic leap across the globe, from the ancient texts of Jerusalem to the arid, sun-scorched deserts of Nevada in the American West. Here, for countless generations, the indigenous Paiute people have passed down their oral histories, stories that form the bedrock of their culture and their understanding of the world. And among these stories is a strange and terrifying legend about a tribe they battled in the distant past. They called this tribe the Ctach. According to the oral tradition of the Paiute, the Ctach were not an ordinary people. They were a tribe of fierce, warlike giants. But their most distinctive feature, the one mentioned in every telling of the story, was their fiery red hair. The Paiute described these red-haired giants as savage and cruel. They were said to be cannibals, hunting and eating the smaller Paiute people, spreading terror throughout the land. They were a constant threat, an existential enemy that had to be dealt with. The legend recounts that after many years of brutal warfare, the various Paiute bands finally decided to put an end to the Ctach menace once and for all. They formed a great alliance and waged a final, climactic war against the giants. Outnumbered and overwhelmed, the last remnants of the Ctach were driven into a large cave on the shores of what was then Humboldt Lake. They took refuge deep inside, refusing to surrender. The Paiute warriors, determined to finish the fight, gathered a massive pile of brush and timber at the mouth of the cave. They set it on fire, creating a huge, choking cloud of smoke that billowed into the cavern. The Paiute legend says that any of the Ctach who tried to escape the smoke were met with a volley of arrows. The rest, trapped inside, either suffocated from the smoke or were burned alive in the inferno. And so, the Paiute story concludes, the last of the red-haired giants were exterminated, their final resting place a smoke-blackened cave in the Nevada desert. For centuries, this was simply a piece of local folklore. It was a fascinating story, to be sure, but one that was dismissed by the early white settlers and historians as a primitive myth, a tall tale told around a campfire with no basis in reality. The idea of red-haired, cannibalistic giants roaming the American West seemed like pure fantasy. The cave mentioned in the legend, however, was a real place. It was known to locals as Horseshoe Cave and later Lovelock Cave after a nearby town. And it was here, in the early 20th century, that a series of discoveries would take this ancient legend out of the realm of myth and into the world of tangible, physical evidence, creating a mystery that endures to this day. The story of the discovery begins not with archaeologists, but with two miners, David Pugh and James Hart. In 1911, they were not searching for giants or lost tribes. They were searching for something far more mundane: bat guano. In the arid West, nutrient-rich bat guano was a valuable commodity mined from caves and sold as a potent commercial fertilizer. Pugh and Hart had secured the rights to excavate the guano from Lovelock Cave. As they began to dig deep into the cave floor, clearing away the top layers of bat droppings, they started to find things. Strange things. Their shovels began to turn up not just rock and guano, but countless ancient artifacts, perfectly preserved by the cave's incredibly dry environment. They found woven baskets of stunning craftsmanship, fishing nets, bird-shaped decoys used for hunting, and various tools. But they also found human remains. As they dug deeper, through layers of guano that were estimated to be several feet thick, they uncovered numerous skeletons and mummified bodies. And according to the initial reports and anecdotal accounts from the miners and local residents, many of these remains were unusual. They were said to be of a surprisingly large stature, with some skeletons reportedly measuring well over 6.5 feet tall, and even some whispers of 7-footers. And most startlingly, many of the mummified bodies and skulls still had hair attached, and that hair was a distinct reddish color. The miners, likely aware of the local Paiute legends, were astounded. Here, in the very cave from the myth, they were seemingly unearthing the physical remains of a tall, red-haired people. Word of the unusual finds began to spread, and the discoveries soon attracted the attention of the academic world. In 1912, the University of California dispatched an archaeologist, Llewellyn L. Loud, to conduct an official excavation. Loud recognized the immense archaeological importance of the site. He and his team spent several months systematically excavating a section of the cave. The sheer volume of artifacts they recovered was staggering. Over 10,000 individual items were cataloged. The cave, it turned out, had been used as a habitation and storage site by ancient peoples for thousands of years. The finds included what are now considered the oldest duck decoys ever discovered in the world, beautifully crafted from reeds and feathers over 2,000 years ago. Loud's official report focused primarily on the cultural artifacts, the baskets, tools, and decoys. But he did document the discovery of human remains, including mummified bodies. And in his field notes and early reports, the strange anomalies are mentioned. He described skeletons of individuals who were notably tall for the region and time period. He noted the presence of reddish hair on some of the mummies. And most tantalizingly, he documented the discovery of sandals woven from fiber that were of an exceptionally large size. Some of these sandals measured up to 15 inches in length. A sandal of that size would belong to a person of truly impressive stature, likely close to, or even exceeding, 7 feet tall. The discoveries at Lovelock Cave seemed to provide stunning corroboration for the Paiute legend. The location was correct. The evidence of a great fire near the cave entrance was present, and the remains of a tall, red-haired people, along with artifacts like the giant sandals, were seemingly unearthed. For a time, the story of the Lovelock Cave giants became a sensation, written about in newspapers and amateur archaeological journals. Some of the larger skulls and bones were reportedly put on display in local museums. It seemed that a piece of Native American folklore had been proven to be a literal historical fact. And this is where the mystery deepens and the story becomes profoundly frustrating. Just as the evidence seemed to be mounting, it began to disappear. The trail goes cold, not because of a lack of interest, but because the most crucial pieces of evidence, the large skeletons themselves, have vanished. In the decades following the excavations, many of the human remains from Lovelock Cave were scattered. Some ended up in private collections, their whereabouts now unknown. Some were stored in the back rooms of museums, only to be lost or misplaced over the years. And most significantly, in more recent times, Federal legislation like the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, NAGPRA, has mandated that Native American remains held by museums be returned to their affiliated tribes for reburial. While this legislation is a crucial and just act to correct the historical wrongs of robbing Native graves, it has had an unintended consequence for this particular mystery. Many of the remaining Lovelock skeletons, including some of those that were reportedly very large, have been repatriated to the Paiute tribes and reburied in undisclosed locations. This means they are no longer available for scientific study, measurement, or DNA analysis. The key evidence has been returned to the Earth, effectively closing the case and leaving us with more questions than answers. With the primary evidence gone, we are left to sift through the conflicting accounts and the scientific counterarguments. Mainstream science, understandably, is highly skeptical of the giant interpretation. They offer a series of plausible, conventional explanations for the strange findings at Lovelock Cave. First, the issue of the red hair. Scientists point out that dark hair can turn reddish-brown or orange over long periods of time due to changes in the hair's keratin, a process accelerated by the specific mineral content and acidity of the soil in which a body is buried. What appears to be genetic red hair could simply be an artifact of time and chemistry. Second, the question of height. While early reports spoke of 7-foot skeletons, later, more sober analyses of the few remaining bones suggest that while some individuals were tall, perhaps reaching 6 feet, or even a little over, they were not outside the normal range of human variation. The tales of true giants may have been exaggerations that grew in the telling, fueled by the excitement of the discovery and the pre-existing legend. As for the 15-inch sandals, a few explanations have been offered. They could have belonged to one or two exceptionally tall individuals in the community. Or, some anthropologists have suggested, they may not have been everyday footwear at all, but could have been a type of overshoe, or even a primitive snowshoe, designed to be worn over another moccasin to distribute weight when walking on soft ground or mud. The problem with all these explanations is that they are just as speculative in their own way as the giant theory. They are plausible possibilities, but they cannot be proven without access to the original skeletons. The disappearance of the key evidence leaves the door open for more conspiratorial interpretations. Why did the most compelling skeletons vanish? Was it just institutional neglect and the passage of time? Or was there a more deliberate effort to suppress a discovery that was simply too controversial, a find that would have radically rewritten the history of ancient North America? Proponents of the giant theory argue that the discovery was suppressed precisely because it challenged the established scientific orthodoxy. The idea of a distinct, non-native race of red-haired giants did not fit with the accepted models of migration across the Bering Strait. It was an anomaly, an outlier that was easier to ignore or explain away than to confront. They point to a pattern of similar reports from the 19th and early 20th centuries, where amateur excavators across the United States reported finding unusually large skeletons, often with strange anatomical features, only to have the evidence lost or confiscated by institutions like the Smithsonian. While many of these reports are undoubtedly hoaxes or exaggerations, the sheer volume of them has led some to believe in a systematic cover-up of evidence for a forgotten race of American giants. And so, the mystery of Lovelock Cave remains perfectly, frustratingly balanced. On one side, we have a detailed and ancient Native American legend of red-haired, cannibalistic giants. On the other, we have a series of archaeological discoveries from the very same cave that seem to corroborate the key details of that legend: evidence of a great fire, artifacts of unusual size, and the remains of a tall people with reddish hair. But the crucial physical evidence needed to definitively prove the case has vanished, leaving us with only the legend, the old field notes, and the competing theories of mainstream science and conspiracy. Was the CTCH legend just a myth? Or was it a true, historical memory of a conflict between two different peoples, a memory that has been dismissed by science because its implications are simply too strange to accept? Lovelock Cave stands as a silent monument to this enigma, a place where a biblical-style myth of giants seems to erupt from the American desert, offering a tantalizing, yet ultimately unprovable, piece of physical evidence in the global search for the truth behind the legends of the Nephilim. The trail of the Nephilim has led us from the cryptic verses of ancient scripture to the dusty, enigmatic discoveries in a Nevada cave. We have a powerful textual tradition from the Near East describing a race of giants born from a forbidden union of divine and human, and we have a parallel oral tradition from North America, seemingly supported by physical evidence, telling of a war against red-haired giants. The convergence of these two independent lines of evidence is tantalizing. It raises the profound question, how do we make sense of this? If we are not to dismiss these stories as mere fantasy, what could be the real, historical phenomenon that lies behind the myth? This is where our investigation moves from gathering evidence to exploring theories, venturing into a landscape of speculation that ranges from the cosmic and extraterrestrial to the deeply human and psychological. The first, and by far the most sensational, modern explanation for the Nephilim is a theory that takes the biblical narrative and reinterprets it through the lens of science fiction. This is the ancient astronaut theory. Popularized in the mid-20th century by authors like Erich von Däniken, this theory proposes that the gods of ancient mythologies were not supernatural beings, but were, in fact, flesh and blood extraterrestrials who visited Earth in the distant past. In this view, the sons of God from Genesis 6 were not fallen angels in a spiritual sense. They were astronauts from another, more advanced civilization. According to this theory, these extraterrestrial visitors, possessing superior technology and knowledge, would have been seen as gods by early, primitive humans. The story of their descent from the heavens was not a metaphor, but a literal description of spacecraft arriving from the sky. The forbidden knowledge they taught humanity, metallurgy, astronomy, warfare, was not magic but technology, gifted or perhaps carelessly leaked to a species not yet ready for it. And the Nephilim, their famous offspring, were not the children of angels, but were the products of a cosmic genetic experiment, alien-human hybrids. This would explain their reported strangeness, their great power, and their immense size. Perhaps they were genetically engineered to be a warrior or worker class. Their legendary status as heroes of old, men of renown, would be a memory of these powerful, half-alien beings who once dominated the planet. The Great Flood, in this interpretation, might have been a natural catastrophe, or perhaps even a deliberate act by one faction of these aliens to wipe the slate clean, to erase their failed experiment and start over. The ancient astronaut theory takes every supernatural element of the Nephilim story and gives it a technological, extraterrestrial explanation. It is a compelling and imaginative idea that has captured the public imagination, forming the basis for countless books, television shows, and movies. It provides a neat, all-encompassing solution to the mystery. However, like the literal interpretation of the biblical text, this theory suffers from a profound lack of physical evidence. While proponents point to ambiguous ancient artworks or architectural marvels as proof of alien technology, there has never been a single, verifiable extraterrestrial artifact found. There is no crashed spaceship, no alien alloy, no piece of advanced circuitry recovered from an archaeological dig. The theory remains an exercise in speculation, an exciting what-if scenario that reinterprets ancient myths in a modern, scientific-sounding language, but without the scientific proof to back it up. It is a modern myth created to explain an ancient one. This leads us to a second, more grounded, and scientifically plausible theory. This explanation doesn't look to the stars for an answer, but to the deep, evolutionary history of our own planet. This theory speculates that the persistent, cross-cultural legends of giants are not a memory of angels or aliens, but are a distorted cultural memory of encounters with other, now extinct human species. We have a tendency to think of ourselves, Homo sapiens, as having been alone on this planet for most of our history. But we now know that is not true. The fossil and genetic record has revealed a much more complex and fascinating story. For tens of thousands of years, our direct ancestors shared the Earth with other distinct types of humans. The most famous of these are the Neanderthals. For a long time, Neanderthals were depicted as brutish, hunched-over cavemen, but we now know they were highly intelligent, sophisticated tool users, and capable of symbolic thought. They were also physically different from us. On average, they were shorter but much more robust, with thicker bones, broader chests, and immense physical strength. An encounter between a group of early Homo sapiens and a group of Neanderthals would have been an encounter with a powerful, physically imposing other. Even more intriguing are the Denisovans, a mysterious branch of the human family tree discovered only recently through a single finger bone and a few teeth found in a Siberian cave. DNA analysis has shown that they were a distinct lineage, separate from both Neanderthals and us. While we know very little about what they looked like, genetic evidence suggests they may have been adapted to high-altitude, low-oxygen environments and were also physically robust. And we know for a fact that our Homo sapiens ancestors did not just encounter these other humans, they interbred with them. Most modern humans with ancestry outside of Africa carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA in their genome, and populations in Southeast Asia and Oceania carry a significant percentage of Denisovan DNA. The forbidden unions described in the Book of Genesis could, in this view, be a mythologized memory of these very real, ancient interbreeding events between different human species. Imagine a small band of our ancestors, thousands of years ago, encountering a tribe of these other, more powerfully built humans. The memory of these strong, strange, and perhaps intimidating others would have been passed down through generations around the campfire. Over the millennia, as these other human species went extinct and faded from lived experience into legend, the stories would have become exaggerated. Stronger than us would become giants. Different from us would become children of the gods or monsters. The legend of a war against the CTCAH in Nevada could be a distant, localized echo of a real conflict between a later wave of migrating Homo sapiens and an earlier, remnant population of a different human type. The red hair could even be a memory of the lighter hair and skin pigmentation that was common in Neanderthals. This theory has the advantage of being rooted in actual scientific discoveries about our own past. It doesn't require us to believe in angels or aliens, only in the power of human memory to transform history into myth. The Nephilim, in this light, were not supernatural hybrids. They were our own lost cousins, their memory preserved in the amber of folklore. Finally, we arrive at the third and most widely accepted explanation among mainstream biblical scholars and historians. This interpretation suggests that we have been asking the wrong question all along. It proposes that the story of the Nephilim was never intended to be a literal, historical account of physical giants, whether their origin be angelic, alien, or Neanderthal. Instead, it was intended as a powerful and sophisticated metaphor, a moral and theological allegory about the nature of power, sin, and divine judgment. In this view, the giants were not giants in physical stature, but were giants in terms of their power, their arrogance, and their tyranny. The Nephilim were the great kings, the powerful warlords, and the cruel tyrants of the ancient world. They were men who, through their immense power and hubris, began to see themselves as gods, blurring the line between the human and the divine. The term sons of God, in this interpretation, could refer to the ancient tradition of divine kingship, where rulers in Mesopotamia and Egypt claimed to be the sons or representatives of the gods. The story in Genesis 6 would then be a polemic, a critique of this pagan worldview. It's an Israelite author saying, "You know those great and famous kings of old, the ones who built empires and called themselves gods? Their power was illegitimate, born from a corrupt and unholy union, and their tyranny is what brought ruin upon the world." The story becomes a cautionary tale about the abuse of power. The forbidden knowledge, taught by the Watchers in the Book of Enoch Weaponmaking, sorceries a metaphor for the technologies of power and control that allow tyrants to dominate others. The insatiable, cannibalistic appetite of the giants is a metaphor for the endless greed and violence of unchecked ambition and empire. The story is not about biology. It's about morality. It serves as a theological explanation for the origin of evil and suffering in the world. It's not about the interbreeding of species. It's about the corrupting nature of absolute power. This metaphorical interpretation has the advantage of fitting neatly within the broader themes of the Book of Genesis, which is deeply concerned with issues of human pride, disobedience, and the consequences of trying to usurp God's authority from Adam and Eve at the Tree of Knowledge to the builders of the Tower of Babel. The Nephilim story is another chapter in this ongoing narrative of human hubris leading to divine punishment. It explains why the world had become so wicked that a cataclysm like the Great Flood was necessary. It wasn't just random human sin, it was a fundamental corruption of the created order, led by these titanic figures of legend. The giants in the Promised Land and the figure of Goliath would then be literary devices, used by the biblical authors to represent the seemingly insurmountable, monstrous power of the enemies of Israel, a power that could only be defeated through faith in God, not by human strength alone. So, where does this leave us in our quest for the truth behind the Nephilim? We are presented with a spectrum of possibilities. On one end, we have the cosmic, a story of extraterrestrial visitors and genetic hybrids. It's a grand, imaginative theory that captures the modern imagination but lacks any concrete physical proof. In the middle, we have the historical and anthropological, a plausible theory that the legends are a faded memory of our own extinct human relatives, a story supported by the fossil record but one that is difficult to definitively link to specific myths. And on the other end, we have the metaphorical, a sophisticated theological interpretation that sees the Nephilim as a powerful symbol of tyranny and sin, a story that makes perfect sense within its literary and religious context, but disappoints those looking for a literal, historical giant. Perhaps the true answer does not lie exclusively in any one of these theories. It's possible that the legend of the Nephilim is a complex tapestry woven from threads of all three. Perhaps there was a historical memory of encounters with other, powerful human species. This memory, over millennia, may have been embellished and transformed into a myth about literal giants. And then, this myth was taken up by the biblical authors and infused with a deep theological meaning, used as a powerful allegory to explain the origin of evil and the justice of God. The story could be simultaneously a historical echo, a mythic exaggeration, and a moral metaphor. The enduring power of the Nephilim story is that it resists easy answers. It remains an enigma, a strange and powerful fragment from a lost world that continues to challenge our understanding of the past. Whether they were the hybrid children of fallen angels, a forgotten branch of our own family tree, or a powerful symbol of human pride, the Nephilim force us to confront the possibility that our ancient past was far stranger, more complex, and more mysterious than we can ever fully know. They are a reminder that some legends are so potent, they walk the earth forever, casting a giant shadow over our history. The story of the Nephilim exists in the fascinating space between myth, memory, and potential reality. From the cryptic verses of the Bible to the dusty finds at Lovelock Cave, the legend of ancient giants persists. Whether they were the hybrid children of fallen angels, a distorted memory of a lost human species, or simply a powerful metaphor for tyranny, the Nephilim force us to confront the possibility that our ancient past was far stranger and more mysterious than we can imagine. Thanks for exploring with Ancient Relics Keeper. What mystery should we unravel next? Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Let's keep digging into history's secrets together. Welcome to Ancient Relics Keeper. Uncover hidden histories, lost artifacts, and ancient mysteries. Join us as we explore the past secrets. Subscribe and dive into history's untold stories. The story of Jesus Christ, the Savior of the West, is known across the globe. But on the other side of the world, ancient India tells the story of another divine savior, the beloved god Krishna. For over a century, some researchers have pointed to a series of startling similarities between their stories, suggesting a hidden connection that could challenge the origins of two of the world's great religions. The story of a divine being descending to earth to live among mortals, to teach, to perform miracles, and to offer a path to salvation is a narrative of immense power. In the Western world, this story is inextricably linked with one name, Jesus Christ. His life, as told in the Gospels, is seen as a singular, unparalleled event in history. But what if it wasn't? What if, on the other side of the planet, in the ancient and spiritually rich land of India, a remarkably similar story was being told, a story centered around one of the most beloved deities in all of Hinduism, the god Krishna? The theory that the stories of Krishna and Christ are deeply, and perhaps directly, connected is one that has been debated and whispered about for over a century. To begin our investigation, we must first lay out the evidence as proponents of this theory see it. We must examine the alleged parallels in their biographies, a series of astonishing similarities that seem to suggest these two figures, separated by thousands of miles and different cultures, may have shared a single, archetypal life story. Our comparison begins, as all life stories do, at the very beginning, with a divine birth shrouded in prophecy and peril. In the Christian narrative, the birth of Jesus is a cornerstone of the faith. He is believed to be the Son of God, a divine incarnation sent to earth. He is born to a human mother, the Virgin Mary, but his conception is miraculous, a work of the Holy Spirit. His arrival is not a random event. It is the fulfillment of centuries of prophecy from the Hebrew Scriptures, which foretold the coming of a Messiah, a Savior who would redeem his people. Now, let us turn our gaze to ancient India and the sacred texts of Hinduism, particularly the epic Mahabharata and the later, more detailed Puranas. Here we find the story of Krishna. Krishna is not just a minor deity or a prophet. He is worshipped by hundreds of millions as a supreme being, a full incarnation, or avatar, of the great god Vishnu, the preserver and protector of the universe. Vishnu, it is believed, descends to earth in various forms whenever the world is overcome by evil and chaos, to restore dharma or cosmic order. And Krishna is considered his most complete and glorious incarnation. Like Jesus, he is a divine being born to a human mother, a woman named Devki. The circumstances of Krishna's birth are also steeped in prophecy. The story is set in the kingdom of Mathura, ruled by a cruel and tyrannical king named Kamsa. Kamsa was a powerful despot who had usurped the throne and imprisoned his own father. His beloved sister was Devki. At Devki's wedding, as Kamsa was driving her chariot, a divine voice, a prophecy from the heavens, thundered out. It declared that Kamsa's reign of terror would end, and that he would be killed by the eighth son born to his sister, Devki. The prophecy was a death sentence for Kamsa, delivered by a divine source. This directly parallels the Old Testament prophecies that foretold the birth of a new king in Israel who would challenge the existing order. In both traditions, the arrival of the Savior is not a surprise, but a preordained event, announced to the world before it happens. The reaction of the tyrant king in both stories is where the parallels become truly chilling and remarkably specific. Upon hearing the prophecy, King Kamsa is consumed by a paranoid rage. His first impulse is to kill his sister Devki on the spot. He is only stopped when her new husband promises to hand over every child they have to Kamsa immediately after its birth. Kamsa agrees. He imprisons Devki and her husband, and one by one, as she gives birth to her children, he snatches the infants from her arms and smashes their heads against the stone floor of the prison. He murders her first 6 sons in cold blood. Her 7th is miraculously saved. When Devki becomes pregnant for the 8th time, the prophesied child, Kamsa's vigilance is absolute. He is determined that this child will not survive. Now, let's compare this to the story told in the Gospel of Matthew. In Judea, another tyrant, King Herod the Great, learns from the visiting Magi that a child has been born who is destined to be the king of the Jews. Like Kamsa, Herod is a deeply paranoid and ruthless ruler, known for executing anyone he perceived as a threat, including members of his own family. He sees this newborn king as a direct challenge to his authority. To eliminate this threat, he unleashes an act of unspeakable cruelty, the massacre of the innocents. He orders his soldiers to go to Bethlehem and kill every single male child under the age of 2. The goal is identical to Kamsa's: to destroy a prophesied divine child in his infancy to protect his own illegitimate power. In both narratives, the divine child miraculously escapes this murderous plot. In the Krishna story, on the night of his birth, the prison guards magically fall into a deep sleep. The chains fall from his father's wrists, and the locked prison doors swing open. His father spirits the newborn Krishna away, crossing a raging river that miraculously parts for them, and swaps him with the newborn daughter of a humble cowherding family in the nearby village of Gokul. The infant Krishna is safe, hidden from the tyrant. In the Christ story, Joseph is warned in a dream by an angel about Herod's plot. He takes Mary and the infant Jesus and flees under the cover of night, becoming a refugee and finding safety in the distant land of Egypt. The structural parallels are astonishing. A divine prophecy, a threatened infancy, a murderous tyrant, an order to slaughter infants, and a miraculous escape into hiding. The theory proposes that these are not two separate stories, but one ancient narrative template of the imperiled divine child, told in two different cultural contexts. As we move from their dramatic births to their lives and teachings, the alleged similarities continue. After their miraculous escapes, both Krishna and Jesus are raised in humble, pastoral circumstances, far from the halls of power. Jesus grows up in the quiet town of Nazareth, the son of a carpenter, a simple artisan. Krishna is raised in the rustic village of Gokul, among a community of cowherds. He is a humble cowherd himself, spending his youth playing a flute, tending cattle, and engaging in playful pranks. Both saviors are thus depicted as being deeply connected to the common people, to the shepherds and the craftsmen, not to the wealthy or the political elite. Their power comes from their divine nature, not from earthly status. When they reach adulthood, both figures emerge as profound spiritual teachers who gather followers and perform miracles. The miracles attributed to Krishna in the Hindu texts are legendary and spectacular. As a child, he is depicted as a divine trickster with immense power, subduing demons and protecting his village. The most famous of these stories is the lifting of Govardhan Hill. When the god Indra, angry at the villagers, unleashes a torrential downpour to drown them, the young Krishna calmly lifts an entire mountain with his little finger and holds it up like an umbrella for 7 days and 7 nights, sheltering all the people and cattle of his village beneath it. Jesus, too, is renowned for his power over the natural world. He calms a raging storm on the Sea of Galilee with a single command. In one of his most famous miracles, he feeds a crowd of 5,000 people with only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Both stories, the lifting of the mountain and the feeding of the multitude, serve the same narrative purpose. They demonstrate the Savior's divine power, his compassionate protection of his people, and his ability to suspend the normal laws of nature for their benefit. Proponents of the theory point to a host of other alleged miracles that the two figures share, from healing the sick and deformed to even, in some interpretations, raising the dead. Beyond their miracles, both Krishna and Christ are revered as supreme spiritual teachers, whose words have formed the foundation of major world religions. The teachings of Jesus are most famously encapsulated in the Sermon on the Mount, where he delivers a radical new ethical code based on love, humility, and forgiveness. He teaches through parables, simple stories that convey profound spiritual truths. His teachings challenge the religious authorities of his day and offer a direct, personal path to God. Krishna's teachings are most famously contained within a single, extraordinary section of the Mahabharata known as the Bhagavad Gita, or the Song of God. In this text, on the brink of a cataclysmic battle, Krishna reveals his divine form to the warrior Arjuna and delivers a profound discourse on the nature of reality, duty, dharma, and the path to spiritual liberation. He outlines different paths to God through action, through knowledge, and through devotion, bhakti. Like Jesus, Krishna teaches of a personal, loving relationship with God and offers a path to salvation for all who come to him with faith. Both the Sermon on the Mount and the Bhagavad Gita are considered two of the most beautiful and influential spiritual texts ever composed, and both are presented as the direct teachings of a divine being in human form. Even the way they are described, the titles and epithets used for them, are said to show remarkable overlap. Jesus is called the Good Shepherd, who cares for his flock. Krishna, the divine cowherd, is also often referred to as a shepherd of his people. Jesus declares, "I am the light of the world." Krishna, in the Gita, reveals his universal form as a light more brilliant than 1,000 suns. Both are seen as mediators between the human and the divine, a bridge to a higher reality. Proponents of the theory argue that these are not just generic titles for a holy person, but specific, shared identities that point to a common source. Finally, we arrive at the most sensational and controversial area of comparison, the death and alleged resurrection of the two figures. The death of Jesus is the climax of the Christian story. He is betrayed, arrested, tried, and executed by crucifixion. His death is a voluntary sacrifice, an act meant to atone for the sins of humanity. Krishna's death, as described in the final sections of the Mahabharata, is also a poignant and significant event. In his later life, after his great victory in battle, a curse is placed upon his people. Krishna, knowing his time on earth is ending, goes to meditate in a forest. As he is sitting under a tree, a hunter named Jara mistakes his partially visible foot for a deer. The hunter shoots an arrow, which strikes Krishna in his heel. This, the story explains, was the one vulnerable spot on his otherwise invincible body. The wound is mortal, and the great god Krishna, his earthly mission complete, willingly lets go of his human form and ascends to his heavenly abode. At first glance, the stories seem very different, but proponents of the theory draw a specific parallel. They point to the fact that both saviors are killed by being pierced. Christ is pierced on the cross by nails and a spear. Krishna is pierced by an arrow. They also point to the visual imagery. Some have argued that Krishna, dying with his arms outstretched while leaning against a tree, visually evokes the image of a crucifixion. This connection is strengthened by the most explosive claim of all, the assertion that some ancient traditions describe Krishna as being crucified on a tree and then, like Christ, being resurrected after 3 days. If this specific claim were true that an ancient Hindu text describes the crucifixion and 3-day resurrection of Krishna, it would be the smoking gun of this entire theory. It would elevate the connection from a series of interesting coincidences to a case of undeniable, direct borrowing. A story of a divine incarnation, born of a virgin, who teaches, performs miracles, is crucified, and rises on the 3rd day would be a biographical pattern so specific and so unique that it would be almost impossible for it to have arisen independently in 2 different cultures. It would strongly imply that one story was the direct model for the other. And so, the case is laid out. The proponents of the Krishna Christ theory present us with a stunning list of biographical similarities. A divine incarnation, born to a mortal mother. A birth foretold by prophecy. A tyrannical king who seeks to kill the infant savior. A miraculous escape from an infant massacre. A humble, pastoral upbringing. A ministry of teaching and miracles. The role of a divine shepherd. And, most controversially, a death by piercing, followed by a resurrection from the dead. When presented together, this list of parallels paints a powerful and persuasive picture. It suggests that the essential narrative of the Savior God was not invented in 1st century Judea, but was a story that had been told for centuries in India. It seems to challenge the very uniqueness of the Christian narrative, suggesting it is part of a much older, global tradition of storytelling. It feels like the uncovering of a hidden lineage, a secret history that connects 2 of the world's great faiths in a way that neither has ever officially acknowledged. This is the powerful and provocative case for Krishna and Christ being 2 tellings of a single, ancient story. It is a case built on what appear to be dozens of direct, specific, and undeniable parallels. But as we have learned, an extraordinary claim requires extraordinary evidence. And the next step in our investigation must be to take this impressive list and hold it up to the harsh, unforgiving light of historical and textual scrutiny. The parallels between the lives of Krishna and Christ, when laid out side by side, present a powerful and persuasive case. The sheer number of similarities, from the prophesied births and threatened infancies to the miracles and teachings, seems to defy mere coincidence. It paints a picture of a shared biographical template, a story so specific that it feels as if one must have been the model for the other. For those who encounter this theory, it can be a paradigm-shifting moment, suggesting a hidden history that connects the East and West in a way that is both profound and deeply controversial. But a compelling story is not the same as a proven fact. In any serious investigation, it is our duty to cross-examine the evidence, to question the sources, and to see if the case holds up under pressure. And when we apply this critical lens to the Krishna-Christ theory, when we move from the sensational headlines to the scholarly details, the seemingly solid structure of parallels begins to wobble, revealing a case built less on ancient fact and more on modern misinterpretation, exaggeration, and wishful thinking. Let's begin with the most explosive and game-changing claim of all, the one that, if true, would be the undeniable smoking gun. The assertion that Krishna, like Christ, was crucified and resurrected after 3 days. This is the absolute core of the Christian faith, and if it has a direct precedent in ancient Hindu scripture, the implications would be monumental. The problem is, it's simply not true. There is no authentic, ancient Hindu text, not the Mahabharata, not the Puranas, not the Vedas, that describes Krishna being crucified. This claim is a well-known and thoroughly debunked piece of misinformation. The Hindu scriptures are very clear and consistent about the circumstances of Krishna's death. The story is told in the Mahabharata and expanded upon in the Bhagavata Purana. After a long and eventful life, having fulfilled his mission on earth, an aging Krishna retreats into a forest to meditate. As he sits in a yogic posture, leaning against a tree, a hunter named Jara is stalking deer nearby. He sees the sole of Krishna's foot partially visible through the bushes and, tragically, mistakes it for the ear or mouth of a deer. He looses an arrow, which strikes Krishna in his heel. The scriptures explain that this was the one and only spot on Krishna's otherwise invulnerable, divine body where he could be mortally wounded. The hunter, realizing his catastrophic mistake, begs for forgiveness. The dying Krishna consoles him, explaining that it was all part of a larger cosmic destiny, and then, willingly, he releases his earthly form and his spirit ascends to Vaikuntha, the eternal spiritual realm. The story is poignant and theologically significant, but it is not a crucifixion. There is no cross, no nails, no crown of thorns, no public execution. He is not put to death by his enemies. His death is the result of a tragic accident that fulfills a specific curse from an earlier part of the epic. The attempt to link the image of him pierced by an arrow to the piercing of Christ on the cross is a profound stretching of the evidence. It takes two completely different modes of death and tries to force them into the same category based on a single, generic verb. Likewise, the claim of a 3-day resurrection is also a fabrication. The texts describe Krishna's immediate ascension to the spiritual world upon his death. There is no period of being dead in a tomb, followed by a physical, bodily resurrection to appear before his followers on earth. The very concept is alien to the Hindu theological framework of his departure. So where did these dramatic but false claims come from? They can be traced back to the 19th century, to a period of intense intellectual excitement and sometimes reckless speculation about the connections between world religions. Authors like the French writer Louis Jacoliot and the American freethinker Kersey Graves published books that drew sensational parallels between various religious figures. Graves' 1875 book, The World's 16 Crucified Saviors, was particularly influential. He compiled a list of figures from different cultures whom he claimed were all virgin-born, crucified, and resurrected saviors, with Krishna being a prime example. The problem is that Graves' scholarship was appallingly bad. He worked primarily from secondary or tertiary sources, often misquoted or misunderstood them, and in many cases, seems to have simply invented facts to fit his thesis. His work has been thoroughly discredited by modern, professional scholars of both religion and history who have shown that his claims are unsupported by the primary texts. Yet, his ideas, because they are so sensational, have had a long and stubborn afterlife, constantly being recycled and presented as fact on the internet and in fringe documentaries, long after being debunked in the academic world. With the central pillar of the crucifixion/resurrection parallel removed, the entire structure of the theory becomes much less stable. But let's examine the other claims, as even without this, the remaining similarities seem compelling. This brings us to the second major problem for the theory, the critical issue of timing and the direction of influence. To argue that Hinduism influenced Christianity, you must be able to show that the Hindu stories are definitively older than the Christian ones. While the core figure of Krishna is indeed ancient, with roots stretching back to the first millennium BCE, many of the specific, detailed stories that contain the most striking parallels to the Gospels were actually written down much later. Take the story of the infant massacre. The narrative of King Kamsa learning of a prophecy and seeking to kill the infant Krishna is a cornerstone of the comparison with King Herod. However, this detailed story is not found in the earliest texts that mention Krishna, such as the Mahabharata. It appears in its full, dramatic form in later texts, most notably the Harivamsa, an appendix to the Mahabharata, and, most famously, the Bhagavata Purana. The scholarly consensus is that these texts were likely composed and written down in their final form sometime between the 4th and 10th centuries AD. This is centuries after the Gospels were written and Christianity was well established. This chronological problem opens up a startling possibility, one that turns the entire theory on its head. If the detailed story of the threatened infant Krishna was written down after the story of the threatened infant Jesus was already widely known, could the influence have gone in the other direction? Is it possible that the Hindu authors were influenced by the Christian narrative? We know that there was trade and cultural contact between India and the Roman Empire. The Apostle Thomas is traditionally believed to have traveled to India to spread the Christian message in the 1st century AD. It is historically plausible that stories from the Gospels could have been carried to India along these ancient trade routes and, over time, been absorbed and adapted into the evolving Krishna traditions, with Herod's massacre being reimagined as Kamsa's. This doesn't mean the story was stolen, but rather that it was a compelling narrative motif that was integrated into the existing lore. This possibility makes it almost impossible to definitively claim that the Krishna story was the original source for the gospel narrative. The timing is simply too ambiguous and, in some cases, points in the opposite direction. Another apparent similarity that dissolves under scrutiny is the names themselves, Krishna and Christ. To a modern English speaker, the names sound similar. This has led many to believe they must be related, that Christ is a corruption of Krishna. This is a classic example of a false etymology based on a surface-level acoustic resemblance. The two names come from completely different languages and have completely different meanings. Krishna is a Sanskrit word. Its primary meaning is black, dark, or dark blue, which refers to the god's traditional complexion in Hindu art, a symbol of his mysterious, infinite nature. Christ is not a name at all. It is a title. It comes from the Greek word Christos, which is a direct translation of the Hebrew word Mashiach, Messiah. Both words mean the anointed one, referring to the ancient practice of anointing a king or high priest with oil. The two words have no linguistic connection whatsoever. Their similarity in English is a pure and, for the theory, a very misleading coincidence. This brings us to the third, and perhaps most fundamental, flaw in the theory, its tendency to ignore the vast and profound differences in theological and cultural context. To create the long list of parallels, proponents of a theory must engage in an aggressive form of cherry-picking. They isolate small details that seem similar while ignoring the massive contextual differences that give those details their meaning. The stories are not just a collection of biographical plot points, they're expressions of two vastly different worldviews. Let's look at the humble upbringing. Yes, Jesus was a carpenter and Krishna was a cowherd. This is presented as a parallel. but the meaning and tone are completely different. Jesus' humble life is part of a narrative of kenosis, or self-emptying, a story of a divine being who willingly takes on the lowly status of a servant. Krishna's life as a cowherd, in contrast, is the central theme of a body of literature filled with joy, playfulness, and divine romance. His youth is not about humility, but about Lila, or divine play. He is a mischievous prankster who steals butter, a charismatic dancer who enchants the entire village, and a divine lover who multiplies himself to dance with all the gopis, milkmaids, at once. The emotional and theological tone of the two humble childhoods could not be more different. One is a story of solemn purpose and future sacrifice. The other is a celebration of divine joy and amorous play. The same is true for their teachings. To say that both were great teachers is a generic statement that could apply to hundreds of figures. The content of their teachings is what matters. The Bhagavad Gita is a profound text, but its core concerns are rooted in Hindu philosophy. It deals with concepts like dharma, one's sacred duty within a specific social order, karma, the law of cause and effect across lifetimes, reincarnation, the cycle of death and rebirth, and moksha, liberation from that cycle. These concepts are entirely absent from the teachings of Jesus. Jesus' teachings, rooted in Jewish monotheism, are concerned with the kingdom of God, repentance from sin, a linear view of history leading to a single final judgment, and his unique role as the sole mediator for salvation. To say their teachings are parallel is to ignore the fundamental theological frameworks that make them what they are. Even the shared title of Good Shepherd is a contextual misreading. The image of a king or a god as a shepherd to his people is an ancient and widespread metaphor across the entire Near East and Mediterranean. It appears in Mesopotamian texts and in a Hebrew Old Testament long before the time of Jesus. Jesus was drawing on a familiar metaphor from his own cultural tradition. To link it specifically to Krishna, the divine cowherd, is to create an artificial connection while ignoring the much more immediate and relevant local context. In the end, the attempt to portray the lives of Krishna and Christ as one and the same is a project that can only succeed if one ignores context, disregards chronology, and accepts false information as fact. When we approach the texts as scholars do, with a respect for their historical and cultural integrity, the case falls apart. The most dramatic parallels are shown to be untrue. The timeline for many of the real, though more general, parallels is ambiguous and may even suggest an influence in the opposite direction. And the theological and cultural worlds from which the two figures emerge are so profoundly different that the similarities that do exist seem more like superficial coincidences than evidence of a direct lineage. This does not mean the comparison is worthless. On the contrary, the exercise of comparing them and seeing where the comparison fails is incredibly valuable. It forces us to appreciate the unique and specific genius of each tradition on its own terms. It prevents us from falling into the trap of a lazy universalism that claims all religions are secretly the same. They are not. They are distinct responses to the great questions of human existence, shaped by their unique histories, languages, and cultures. The story of Krishna is a quintessentially Indian story, deeply rooted in the philosophical soil of the subcontinent. The story of Jesus is a quintessentially Jewish story, emerging from the specific historical and theological context of Second Temple Judaism. To try and collapse one into the other is to do a disservice to both. The real mystery, then, is not whether one story was copied from the other, but why we, as human beings, seem driven to tell such similar kinds of stories in the first place. This question leads us beyond the simple debunking of a flawed theory and into the much more profound and interesting territory of universal archetypes and the shared patterns of human imagination. We have now navigated the turbulent waters of the Krishna-Christ theory, steering a course through a storm of sensational claims and emerging on the calmer shores of evidence-based scholarship. The conclusion we've reached is both definitive and, for some, perhaps initially dissatisfying. The popular internet narrative idea that the life of Jesus was a direct, point-for-point plagiarism of the life of Krishna is a house of cards that collapses under the slightest critical pressure. The most spectacular and oft-repeated parallels, the ones that form the very foundation of the copy-paste Theoria crucifixion, a three-day resurrection. 12 disciples are not ancient facts preserved in Hindu scripture, but are instead modern fictions, born from a century of misinterpretation, exaggeration, and outright fabrication. It would be easy, then, to end our investigation right here, to stamp the file, case closed, and declare the entire notion thoroughly debunked. But to do so would be to abandon the quest just as it gets truly interesting. It would leave the most profound and genuinely mysterious question unanswered. If the stories are not the result of direct borrowing, then why do they feel so similar? Why do we perceive these undeniable echoes, these powerful thematic resonances, in two epic narratives that emerged from such different corners of the ancient world? To dismiss these deep similarities as pure, random coincidence feels intellectually lazy, an abdication of our duty as explorers of history's great mysteries. The truth is that the echoes are real, but their source is not to be found in a hidden conspiracy of plagiarism or a secret history of religious theft. Their source lies somewhere much deeper, in a place far more ancient and universal. It lies in the very architecture of the human mind and the shared, timeless patterns of how we tell stories to make sense of ourselves and the cosmos. The answer is not about one story copying another. It's about both stories independently drawing water from the same universal wellspring of human myth. This journey into the why leads us directly to the powerful and illuminating idea of the archetype, a concept most famously and eloquently explored by the great comparative mythologist Joseph Campbell. In his life's work, Campbell embarked on an epic quest of his own, studying the myths, legends, and religious stories from every accessible culture on Earth, from ancient Mesopotamia to the Australian outback, from the Norse sagas to the tales of the Amazonian rainforest. And in this vast sea of stories, he noticed something astonishing. He saw that the same basic character types and the same fundamental plot structures appeared again and again, in cultures that were separated by vast oceans and thousands of years, cultures that could not possibly have had direct contact with one another. He called this universal, underlying story pattern the monomyth, or more famously, the hero's journey. The hero's journey, as Campbell described it, is a narrative template that appears to be hardwired into our collective human psyche. It is the fundamental story of transformation. It begins with a hero living in an ordinary, familiar world who receives a call to adventure, a summons that will take them away from everything they know. At first, the hero often hesitates, refusing the call out of fear or a sense of inadequacy. But a mentor figure, a wise old man, a magical guide appears to give them the tools, the training, or the confidence they need to proceed. The hero then crosses a threshold, leaving the known world behind and entering a supernatural realm, a strange and perilous land of wonders and terrors. In this new world, the hero faces a series of escalating trials, battles, and temptations, each one designed to test their strength, their courage, and their character. They must navigate a road of trials, often aided by allies they meet along the way. Eventually, this path leads them to the ultimate ordeal, the inmost cave, where they must confront their deepest fear, their greatest enemy, or even death itself. This confrontation often involves a symbolic death and rebirth, a moment where the hero's old self is destroyed so that a new, more powerful self can emerge. After surviving this ultimate trial, the hero attains a great treasure, a profound insight, or a magical elixir, what Campbell called the boon. The final stage of the journey is the hero's return to the ordinary world, a difficult and sometimes perilous journey back across the threshold. They return transformed, bearing the boon which they now use to heal, redeem, or transform their society. When you look at the grand narratives of both Krishna and Christ through this archetypal lens, you can see with stunning clarity how closely they fit the pattern. Both figures begin their stories in humble, seemingly ordinary circumstances, their ordinary world. Krishna as a cowherd, Jesus as a carpenter. Both receive a divine call to adventure that sets them on their life's mission. Both are guided by their innate divine nature and by heavenly messengers. They both cross a threshold into the world of public ministry, where they face a road of trials. Krishna must battle a host of powerful demons and confront the tyrannical King Kamsa. Jesus must battle the entrenched religious hypocrisy of the Pharisees and endure the 40 days of temptation by Satan in the wilderness. Both heroes undergo a climactic ordeal that involves their death, or a symbolic descent into a death-like state. Both achieve a final victory. Krishna restores Dharma to the world and establishes a great kingdom. Christ achieves a victory over sin and death itself. And both return with a boon to offer humanity. Krishna offers the profound spiritual teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. Christ offers the gift of grace and the promise of eternal salvation. The specific similarities we observed earlier, the humble beginnings, the performance of miracles, the gathering of followers, the delivery of great teachings, the final, world-altering conflict are not, therefore, evidence of one story copying the other. They are evidence of both stories conforming to this universal, archetypal pattern. They are two culturally specific, deeply nuanced expressions of the same fundamental hero's journey. And it is precisely the same story structure that we see in the myths of the Buddha leaving his palace, of Moses leading his people from slavery, of King Arthur pulling the sword from the stone, and even in our most cherished modern stories, from Luke Skywalker leaving his desert farm in Star Wars to Frodo Baggins leaving the Shire in The Lord of the Rings. The reason these stories resonate so deeply with us, regardless of our culture or time period, is that they speak a universal, symbolic language, a language of trial, transformation, failure, and redemption that is built into the very fabric of how we, as humans, process the world and our place in it. The parallels between Krishna and Christ are not surprising. From a mythological perspective, they are almost inevitable. We can apply this same powerful archetypal lens to the more specific parallels that seemed so convincing at first, like the story of the threatened infant. This, too, is a powerful and widespread archetype that scholars refer to as the divine child. This is the universal story of a child with a special, often divine, destiny who is born in a time of darkness, corruption, and tyranny. Their birth represents a fragile new hope, a new beginning, a light in the darkness. Because this child is a direct threat to the old, corrupt, and established order, a dark and tyrannical power, a jealous king, a devouring monster, a dark god tries to destroy them in their infancy when they are at their most helpless and vulnerable. But the child, through some form of miraculous intervention, divine protection, or the help of loyal guardians, is always saved, hidden away to grow in secret until they are strong enough to emerge and fulfill their world-changing destiny. This exact pattern appears all over the world. We see it in the Greek myth of the infant Zeus, hidden by his mother Rhea on the island of Crete to save him from being swallowed by his paranoid father, the Titan Cronus, who had been prophesied to be overthrown by one of his children. We see it in the foundational story of the Hebrew people, with the infant Moses being placed in a reed basket and set adrift on the Nile to escape the Pharaoh's murderous decree to kill all newborn Hebrew males. We see it in the Arthurian legends of Britain, where the infant King Arthur is whisked away by the wizard Merlin to be raised in obscurity as a commoner, safe from the ambitious nobles who would seek to kill him. And, of course, we see it in the stories of both Krishna, who is smuggled out of prison to be raised by cowherds, safe from King Kamsa, and Jesus, who is taken by his parents on a desperate flight to Egypt, safe from King Herod. The reason this archetype is so universal and so emotionally potent is that it speaks to a deep and fundamental human experience. It is a powerful metaphor for the birth of any new, transformative idea. A new idea, revolutionary philosophy, a paradigm-shifting scientific discovery, a radical new spiritual path is always born into a world dominated by an old, established order. That old order, the tyrant king, often perceives the new idea as a threat and does everything in its power to stamp it out, to ridicule it, to persecute its followers, to suppress it. But if the idea, the divine child, has true power and vitality, it survives its infancy, nurtured in secret by a small group of devoted followers, until it is strong enough to emerge and change the world. The story of the divine child is the archetypal story of hope surviving against all odds. It is a timeless narrative that reassures us that even in the darkest of times, a new light can be born, and that the forces of tyranny and stagnation can never fully extinguish the potential for renewal. Krishna and Christ are not copying each other's birth stories. They are both independently embodying one of humanity's most cherished and enduring archetypal narratives. Beyond these universal psychological archetypes, which speak to our shared humanity, there is another, more concrete historical theory that could help explain some of the more specific cultural similarities between the mythological worlds of India and the West. This theory delves deep into our shared linguistic and cultural ancestry and is known as the Proto-Indo-European hypothesis. For more than a century, linguists have been aware of a startling fact. A vast number of languages spoken across a huge geographical area from the northern plains of India and the Iranian plateau in the east, all the way across the continent of Europe to the west are all demonstrably related. Languages as seemingly different as the ancient Sanskrit of the Hindu scriptures, the Old Persian of the Achaemenid Empire, the classical Greek of Plato, the Latin of the Romans, and the modern German, English, and Russian languages all share a common grammatical structure and a core vocabulary for fundamental concepts like family members, numbers, and nature. This is not a coincidence. This linguistic family tree can only be explained if they all evolved from a single, common ancestor language. Scholars call this hypothetical ancestor language Proto-Indo-European, or PIE. While there are no written records of PIE, linguists have been able to reconstruct much of its vocabulary and grammar by comparing its later daughter languages. They believe it was spoken by a people who likely lived on the Pontic-Caspian steppe, the vast grasslands of what is now southern Russia and Ukraine, sometime between 4,500 and 2,500 BCE. These Proto-Indo-Europeans were semi-nomadic pastoralists who, in a world-changing development, domesticated the horse and invented the wheeled chariot. This new technology gave them a massive advantage in mobility and warfare, and beginning around 4000 BCE, they began a series of massive migrations that would reshape the demographic and linguistic map of the world. One group of these people moved southeast into Central Asia and from there into Iran, and then northern India. They brought with them their language, which would eventually evolve into Sanskrit and become the sacred language of Hinduism. Another group moved west and southwest into Europe, their language evolving over millennia into Greek, Latin, and the Germanic and Celtic languages. But these people didn't just spread their language. They spread their entire culture, their social structures, their values, and, most importantly for our investigation, their myths. By reconstructing the vocabulary of the Proto-Indo-European language, scholars have also been able to reconstruct the key elements of their mythology. They worshipped a chief deity who was a sky father god, whose reconstructed name, Deus Ptr, is the direct and undeniable root of the Greek Zeus Pater and the Roman Jupiter. They told stories of a divine hero or thunder god who slays a great serpent or dragon to release life-giving waters. They had myths about divine twins, often associated with horses, and a heroic warrior god who fought on behalf of the people. This powerful theory of a shared mythological inheritance provides another elegant explanation for the similarities we see between the Indian and the Greco-Roman worlds. It suggests that many of the parallels are not the result of later borrowing during the historical period, but are the result of both cultures inheriting the same basic set of mythic building blocks from a common, incredibly ancient ancestor. For example, the ancient Indian story of the thunder god Indra slaying the great serpent Vritra to release the frozen waters, and the ancient Greek story of the god Apollo slaying the great serpent Python at Delphi could both be divergent evolutions of the same original Proto-Indo-European dragon-slaying myth. How does this apply to the Krishna and Christ comparison? While the figure of Jesus himself emerges from a Semitic tradition, Hebrew, which is not part of the Indo-European family, the culture in which the story of Jesus was first written down, interpreted, and spread was the thoroughly Hellenized, Greco-Roman world. The New Testament was written in Greek, an Indo-European language. Early Christian theology was profoundly shaped by Greek philosophy. Therefore, the Christian narrative was inevitably shaped and understood through an Indo-European cultural lens. Core concepts like a divine hero, a savior figure, an incarnation of a god in human form, and a battle against a force of chaos were already familiar and resonant themes within the Greco-Roman mythological world, a world that shared a distant, but real, ancestral cousinship with the mythological world of India. The similarities, then, may not be a case of direct influence between 1st century India and 1st century Judea, but rather a case of two distinct stories being understood and articulated by cultures that shared a deep, ancient, and common mythological heritage. They were both drawing water from the same ancient well, a wellspring of Proto-Indo-European myth that had fed their respective cultures for thousands of years. This would explain the shared themes and character types without requiring a direct, historical connection between the two specific figures. It is a theory not of later plagiarism, but of shared, primordial origins. Ultimately, the mystery of the parallels between Krishna and Christ leads us to a conclusion that is far more profound and intellectually satisfying than any simple conspiracy. The idea that one story was a crude copy of the other is a theory that, while sensational, does not survive a close examination of the evidence. It is, in essence, a modern myth created to explain ancient myths. But the undeniable echoes we hear between the two stories are real. They are the echoes of the universal human heart, which, across all cultures and all continents, seems compelled to tell the archetypal story of the hero's journey to explain its own potential for transformation. They are the echoes of our shared psychological landscape, which gives birth to the archetype of the divine child who brings hope into a world of despair. And they may even be the distant, faded echoes of a shared ancestral culture, a Proto-Indo-European heritage that provided the mythic DNA for the great civilizations of both the East and the West. The final truth, then, is not that the stories are the same, but that their profound similarities reveal our shared humanity. They show us that no matter what our culture, our language, or our specific religion, we look to the same kinds of powerful narratives to find meaning, to understand our place in the cosmos, and to express our deepest and most enduring hopes for salvation, renewal, and a guiding light in the darkness. The stories of Krishna and Christ are not a historical puzzle to be solved with a simple answer of true or false. They are a beautiful and powerful testament to the universal power of myth and the unbreakable threads of connection that bind the entire human family together in its long, ongoing quest for meaning. The idea of a direct link between Krishna and Christ, while fueled by some striking coincidences, ultimately dissolves under scholarly review. The stories are not the same, yet their echoes are undeniable. These parallels are not proof of a historical conspiracy, but are evidence of a deeper, more profound truth, that humanity, across different cultures and continents, often tells the same kinds of stories to answer the same fundamental questions about life, death, and salvation. Thanks for exploring with Ancient Relics Keeper. What mystery should we unravel next? Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Let's keep digging into history's secrets together. Welcome to Ancient Relics Keeper. Uncover hidden histories, lost artifacts, and ancient mysteries. Join us as we explore the past secrets. Subscribe and dive into history's untold stories. In 2023, the world was stunned when a high-ranking intelligence official, David Grush, testified before the U.S. Congress about secret UFO retrieval programs. But one of his most shocking claims was that the very first crash was not Roswell in 1947, but an incident in Italy in 1933, an event he claims was investigated by Mussolini and then secretly passed to the Vatican for safekeeping. The story of humanity's encounter with the UFO phenomenon is, for most people, a story that begins in the American Southwest. It starts with the legendary crash of a strange object near Roswell, New Mexico, in the summer of 1947. That event, with its tales of a retrieved flying saucer and alien bodies, has become the foundational myth of modern ufology, the patient zero of government cover-ups. But what if the Roswell incident was not the beginning of the story? What if it was merely the moment the secret finally leaked to the American public? What if the first true Roswell happened more than a decade earlier, not in the deserts of New Mexico, but in the green fields of northern Italy, under the watchful eyes of one of history's most notorious dictators? This is the startling claim that has recently sent shockwaves through the intelligence world, a story that, if true, rewrites the entire timeline of the UFO mystery and places its origins squarely in fascist Italy. Our story begins on a summer day, June 13th, 1933. The world is in a precarious state. In Germany, Adolf Hitler has just been appointed chancellor, his dark ambitions beginning to cast a shadow over Europe. In America, the Great Depression holds the nation in its grip. And in Italy, the charismatic and iron-fisted dictator, Benito Mussolini, Illinois Duce, has been in power for over a decade, forging a new, aggressive fascist state. It is against this backdrop of rising global tension that something extraordinary is said to have occurred in the skies over the Lombardy region of northern Italy. Near the small town of Magenta, just west of the bustling city of Milan, an object of unknown origin reportedly fell from the sky. The descriptions that have emerged over the decades are both strange and specific. It was not a conventional airplane. It was said to be a circular or bell-shaped craft, metallic in appearance, with no visible wings, propellers, or method of propulsion. According to the accounts, the craft did not so much crash as perform a controlled descent or a forced landing, suffering some damage but remaining largely intact. This was not a meteorite, not a weather balloon, and not like any known aircraft of the era. This event, happening a full 14 years before the Roswell incident, would make it the first documented case in the modern era of a physical, non-terrestrial craft being recovered by a major world government. In the highly centralized and paranoid state of fascist Italy, an event of this magnitude would not have gone unnoticed. Any unusual aerial phenomenon would have been immediately reported up the chain of command, landing directly on the desk of the one man who held absolute power, Mussolini himself. Il Duce was obsessed with technology, power, and national prestige. He was desperately trying to modernize Italy's military and establish it as a dominant force in Europe. His initial reaction, according to the narrative that has been pieced together, was not one of wonder, but of suspicion. He did not immediately assume the craft was extraterrestrial. His first thought was that it must be a secret weapon, a revolutionary new type of aircraft developed by one of his European rivals, most likely France or the newly ascended Germany. The idea that another nation possessed such a radical technology, far superior to anything in Italy's arsenal, would have been a terrifying prospect. It was a national security crisis of the highest order. Mussolini's response was said to be swift, decisive, and shrouded in absolute secrecy. He immediately dispatched his most elite military and intelligence units to the site. The area was cordoned off, a complete media blackout was imposed, and the mysterious craft was carefully retrieved and transported under heavy guard to a secure military facility nearby, likely a hangar at the SDI Marchetti aircraft factory in the town of Vergiate. The official cover story put out to the public, if any questions were asked, was that a conventional aircraft had experienced engine trouble. But behind the scenes, a far more serious and secret operation was set in motion. This is where the story introduces a figure of immense scientific stature, a name that lends a startling degree of credibility to the entire affair: Guglielmo Marconi. Marconi was more than just a famous scientist. He was a national hero in Italy, a Nobel laureate celebrated as the father of the radio and the inventor of wireless communication. He was a titan of 20th century science, a man whose work had fundamentally changed the world. He was also, at the time, a member of Mussolini's Grand Council of Fascism, placing him in the dictator's inner circle. According to the narrative, Mussolini, recognizing the need for a brilliant scientific mind to analyze this unconventional technology, turned to Marconi. He allegedly gave Marconi a mandate to form and lead a top-secret unit, a clandestine group of Italy's brightest scientists and engineers, tasked with a single, monumental objective: to reverse-engineer the crashed craft. They were to study its materials, understand its propulsion system, and unlock its secrets for the benefit of the fascist state. This secret group was given a codename, a designation that has become central to the entire mystery, the Gabinetto RS/33, which translates to the Research and Security Cabinet 33. The 33, presumably referring to the year of its formation. This was to be Italy's own Majestic 12, a secret committee operating in the shadows, its existence known only to a handful of people at the very top of the government. The formation of the RS/33 cabinet under the leadership of a world-renowned figure like Marconi is a critical element of the story. It elevates the incident from a simple UFO crash anecdote into a plausible, high-level government program. Marconi was a genuine genius, a man who understood advanced physics and electromagnetic principles better than almost anyone on the planet. If anyone could make sense of a piece of non-human technology, it would be him. The story suggests that for the next several years, from 1933 until the outbreak of World War II, this secret cabinet worked in seclusion, studying this strange craft. What they discovered, what conclusions they reached, remains a complete mystery. Did they determine it was, in fact, a secret German weapon? Or did they come to the far more unsettling conclusion that its origins were not of this world at all? For decades, this entire story remained a rumor, a piece of obscure UFO folklore known only to a small circle of Italian researchers. It was a fascinating tale, but it was just a tale. There was no hard evidence, no documentation, no proof to support it. That all changed in the late 1990s and early 2000s with the emergence of what have become known as the fascist UFO files. This is the third and most crucial pillar of the story, the supposed physical evidence. A number of Italian UFO researchers claim to have received a set of documents from a mysterious, anonymous source. This source claimed to be the heir of a man who had been a member of the secret RS/33 cabinet. Before his death, this man had allegedly passed on his personal files to his family, with instructions to release them at a safe time in the future. These documents, if authentic, are nothing short of explosive. They appear to be original memos, telegrams, and reports from the fascist era, typed on official government letterhead and bearing the stamps and signatures of various ministries. The content of these files tells the exact story that had previously only been a rumor. One of the key documents is a telegram, dated June 13, 1933, sent from the Milan prefecture to the main telegraph office in Rome. It urgently requests that all telegraph stations immediately cease forwarding any news regarding an unknown aircraft of an unknown nature and origin. It orders a rescind or respin of any news, replacing it with a story about a meteorological phenomenon. It is, in essence, a classic government cover-up order. Another document, allegedly from the personal files of a senator, outlines the formation of the RS/33 cabinet. It explicitly states that the cabinet is being formed to deal with the problem of unconventional aircraft, and that its findings are to be considered a state secret of the highest level. It warns that any leak of information will be referred to the military tribunal for espionage, a crime punishable by death. The documents even mention Marconi by name, appointing him as the head of the commission. There are hand-drawn sketches of the craft, depicting the classic bell-shaped or flying saucer design. There are memos discussing the analysis of the materials, noting their unusual resistance to heat and pressure. These documents, taken at face value, seem to be the smoking gun. They provide the paper trail, the official documentation that transforms the Magenta crash from a legend into a historical event. They appear to be the lost files of Italy's most profound secret. They offer names, dates, and code names, all the details that lend a powerful sense of authenticity to the story. They create a coherent narrative. A craft crashes, the government recovers it, and a top-secret scientific unit is formed under a world-class scientist to study it, all under a strict vow of secrecy backed by the threat of execution. This is the story of the Magenta incident, the alleged crash of 1933. It is a narrative that is more detailed, more specific, and predates the Roswell story by more than a decade. It presents a picture of a major world power secretly in possession of non-terrestrial technology long before the United States. The implications of this story are immense. It would mean that the UFO cover-up did not begin in post-war America, but in pre-war fascist Europe. It would mean that a figure like Mussolini, known for his political brutality, was also the custodian of one of the greatest secrets in human history. And it would mean that a scientific icon like Guglielmo Marconi spent the final years of his life not just perfecting radio, but secretly trying to understand the science of the stars. This story is a perfect fit for a channel dedicated to uncovering hidden history and government conspiracies. It has all the right ingredients: a mysterious event, a powerful dictator, a brilliant scientist, and a set of secret files that purport to tell the truth. It rewrites a chapter of 20th century history, suggesting that while the world was marching towards a global war, the Italian government was grappling with a secret of cosmic proportions. This is the foundation upon which the entire theory of Vatican involvement is built. Because if this story is true, if the craft and the data were real, then the next logical question is the most important one of all. What happened to it when Mussolini's empire came crashing down? And it is in answering that question that the trail leads directly to Rome and to the steps of the Vatican itself. The story of the 1933 Magenta crash, with its retrieved, otherworldly craft and its top-secret government study group, the Gabinetto RS/33, presents a radical and explosive rewriting of modern history. It suggests that for a full and fateful decade, from 1933 to 1943, Benito Mussolini's fascist regime in Italy was in possession of a secret so profound, so paradigm-shattering, that it could have altered the course of the 20th century. Under the expert guidance of the brilliant Guglielmo Marconi, Italy's brightest scientific minds were allegedly working in absolute secrecy, attempting to comprehend a technology that was not of this earth. But history is a relentless and unforgiving force, and secrets, no matter how well kept, are always vulnerable to the tides of war and the collapse of empires. The secret of Magenta was held by a regime whose time was rapidly running out. The outbreak of World War II and the eventual, ignominious collapse of Italian fascism would create a crisis of unprecedented proportions, a moment of profound chaos and existential uncertainty that threatened to expose the secret to a world at war. And it is in this moment of crisis, this pivotal and desperate historical juncture, that the trail of the mysterious craft takes its most unexpected, its most controversial, and its most incredible turn, leading away from the world of military hangars and secret science labs, and towards the ancient, hallowed, and notoriously secret halls of the Vatican. To truly understand how the Vatican, a seat of the Roman Catholic Church, a spiritual and theological institution, could possibly become entangled in a story about a crashed, unidentified flying object, we must first immerse ourselves in the utter chaos that engulfed Italy in the final, agonizing years of the war. By the summer of 1943, the tide had turned decisively and irreversibly against the Axis powers. The Allied forces, in a massive amphibious operation, had successfully invaded and conquered Sicily and were beginning their slow, bloody, and brutal slog up the Italian peninsula. The Italian people, who had once hailed Mussolini as a savior, were exhausted by a disastrous war, disillusioned with fascism, and starving. Mussolini's personal popularity had plummeted. In a stunning and historic move on July 24, 1943, Mussolini's own Grand Council of Fascism, the very body that was the heart of his power, voted to remove him from office. The next day, he was summoned by King Victor Emmanuel III, dismissed, and promptly arrested. The fascist regime, which had ruled Italy with an iron fist for more than 2 decades, crumbled overnight. What followed was a period of national schism, a descent into a brutal civil war. The new Italian government, led by Marshal Pietro Badoglio, began secret negotiations with the Allies, culminating in the signing of an armistice in early September. The moment the armistice was announced, Italy's former ally, Nazi Germany, instantly became its ruthless occupier. In a swift and terrifying operation, German forces poured across the border, seizing control of the entire northern half of the country, disarming the bewildered Italian army, and freeing Mussolini from his mountaintop prison. Hitler installed Mussolini as the puppet leader of a new, sham state called the Italian Social Republic, but in reality, northern Italy was now under the direct and brutal control of the German military and the SS. Italy was a nation torn in two, a fractured battlefield with the Allies fighting their way up from the south and the Nazis and their remaining fascist loyalists clinging desperately to power in the north. Now, place yourself in the shoes of a scientist, an engineer, or a high-ranking official who has been a member of the top-secret Gabinetto RS/33 for the past 10 years. You have spent a decade studying an object of unimaginable technological and philosophical significance. You have perhaps held a piece of its unearthly metal in your hand. You have seen diagrams of its propulsion system. You know, with absolute certainty, that humanity is not alone in the universe. Your entire world, the nation and the regime you served, has just been turned upside down. Your government has collapsed. Your country is being ripped apart by two warring foreign armies. And you are the custodian of the single most important secret on the planet. You are faced with a critical and terrifying dilemma. What do you do with the craft? The options were all perilous, each one a potential catastrophe. The first and most obvious choice would be to hand the craft and all your research over to the Germans. The Nazis were now the de facto power in northern Italy, the region where the craft and its research facilities were almost certainly being held. And the Germans, particularly Heinrich Himmler's fanatical SS, were obsessed with Wunderwaffen or wonder weapons, advanced technology, and occult artifacts that they believed could miraculously turn the tide of the war. They would have been desperate, almost frantic, to get their hands on such an artifact. It would have been the ultimate superweapon. But for many patriotic Italians, even those who had once been loyal fascists, handing over such a prize to the now brutal German occupiers would have been an unthinkable act of national betrayal. It would mean giving away a technology that could be used to enslave the world, a power that, in their eyes, rightfully belonged to Italy, the nation that had first discovered it. The second option was to attempt to get the craft and the research data south, across the front lines, and into the hands of the advancing Allied forces. This was also fraught with extreme risk. The journey south would be through a war zone, a landscape of checkpoints, skirmishes, and bombing raids. There was no guarantee of success. Furthermore, even if they succeeded, who among the Allies could be trusted? Handing the technology over to the Americans or the British would simply be to give another foreign power an unprecedented and potentially dangerous advantage. The secret would be lost to Italy forever, its discovery exploited for the geopolitical aims of another nation. The members of the RS/33 were caught in an impossible position, trapped between two global superpowers, both of whom would see the discovery not as a moment for human enlightenment, but as a military and technological prize to be weaponized. They needed a third option. They needed a safe haven, an institution that was powerful, independent, globally respected, and, most importantly, neutral. An institution that knew how to keep a secret. In the chaos and moral collapse of 1943 Italy, there was only one place that fit that description. This is where the theory posits a clandestine, desperate handover to the Holy See. The Vatican, an independent sovereign state nestled securely in the heart of Rome, was a unique island of neutrality in the midst of a global inferno. Under the cautious and deeply diplomatic leadership of Pope Pius XII, it walked a delicate tightrope throughout the war, maintaining channels of communication with all sides while desperately trying to protect its own flock and the city of Rome from destruction. It was seen by millions of Italians not just as a religious institution, but as the one enduring symbol of stability and moral authority in a nation that had lost its way. When the government fell, many turned to the church for guidance and protection. The theory suggests that one or more key figures from the now-defunct RS/33 cabinet, perhaps driven by a complex mix of patriotism, fear, and even spiritual duty, made a secret approach to high-ranking officials within the Vatican. It's even possible that a contingency plan had been put in place years earlier by the cabinet's original leader, Guglielmo Marconi. Before his death in 1937, Marconi was not only a world-famous scientist, but also a devout Catholic who had grown closer to the Church in his later years. He had a strong personal and professional relationship with the previous Pope, Pius XI, and was the president of the prestigious Pontifical Academy of Sciences, the Vatican's own scientific body. It is entirely conceivable that Marconi, a man who could see the storm clouds of war gathering over Europe, would have recognized the immense danger of his secret work. A discovery of this magnitude, he might have reasoned, was too profound for any single government or military. It was a revelation that had deep theological and philosophical implications. He may have concluded that the only trustworthy long-term custodian for such a secret was the 2,000-year-old institution of the Church itself. The proposed deal would have been simple in its objective, though staggering in its implications. The scientists would secretly transfer all the physical evidence, the retrieved craft itself, perhaps disassembled, any non-human biological material that may have been recovered, and, crucially, all of their scientific notes, photographs, and research data to the care and protection of the Holy See. In return, the Vatican would use its unique status of sovereign neutrality to grant the object and its knowledge sanctuary. It would protect it from falling into the hands of either the Nazis or the Allies, and it would keep its existence a complete secret from the world until a time when humanity was, perhaps, spiritually and ethically mature enough to handle the revelation. It was a desperate move, born of a desperate time. It was an attempt to place the greatest secret of the 20th century into the hands of an institution that measured time not in years or decades, but in centuries and millennia. The logistics of such a handover would have been incredibly complex, but not impossible. The Vatican maintained its own discreet transport networks and enjoyed a degree of diplomatic immunity. The craft, likely disassembled and packed into anonymous wooden crates, could have been moved from its secret hangar in northern Italy to a secure location in or near Rome under the guise of a protected shipment of priceless Vatican artworks being moved for safekeeping, or as a humanitarian shipment of medical supplies. Once in the custody of the Vatican, it would have vanished from the world as if it had never existed. Its existence would have become a secret known only to the Pope himself and a very small, select circle of his most trusted cardinals. The secret would have been absorbed into the deepest vaults of an institution that has perfected the art of keeping secrets for 2,000 years. The Vatican would become the unlikely and silent guardian of an extraterrestrial truth, waiting, watching, and preserving the secret for a future age. This dramatic and highly speculative story of a crashed alien craft, a secret fascist science unit, and a clandestine handover to the Church remained, for decades, a fringe theory, a piece of high-octane conspiracy known only to a dedicated few in the UFO research community. It was a compelling and internally consistent narrative, but it lacked a credible, public source. It was a story told only in shadows. That all changed in a truly explosive fashion on June 5, 2023. The story erupted from the obscure corners of the internet and into the global headlines, driven by the public testimony of a single, highly credible individual, David Grush. David Grush is not a typical UFO enthusiast or a shadowy conspiracy theorist from the internet. He is a decorated former combat officer in Afghanistan, a respected veteran of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, NGA, and the National Reconnaissance Office, NRO. For several years, he was the NRO's co-lead for the analysis of unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, the official government term for UFOs. He was, in short, a high-ranking intelligence insider with top-secret security clearances, a man whose job it was to investigate what the U.S. government and its intelligence agencies knew about this phenomenon. In 2023, in a move that stunned the world, he became a formal whistleblower, filing a complaint with the Intelligence Community Inspector General and agreeing to testify, under oath, before the United States Congress. His public testimony, and the interviews that surrounded it, was electrifying. He claimed that the U.S. government has been running a top-secret, multi-decade UFO retrieval and reverse engineering program, completely hidden from congressional oversight and the American people. He stated that the government is in possession of multiple non-human spacecraft and has recovered dead pilots, or what he carefully termed non-human biologics. While these general claims were stunning enough, It was a specific detail he provided about the history of these programs that directly connects to our story. Grush was asked about the origins of this multi-decade cover-up, and he stated, based on intelligence he received from multiple, high-level, and credible sources within the program, that the very first recovery of a non-human craft was not the famous Roswell incident in 1947. It was, he said, the incident in Italy in 1933. Grush's testimony gave the old, obscure Italian story a massive and unprecedented boost of public credibility. Here was a decorated intelligence insider, speaking under oath to the U.S. Congress, confirming the core elements of the Magenta crash narrative. But he went even further, and this is what makes his testimony so absolutely critical to our investigation. He explicitly and directly brought the Vatican into the story. He stated that his sources had informed him that Pope Pius XII, the wartime pope, was personally involved in the affair. According to Grush's intelligence, the Pope and the Vatican were fully aware of the 1933 recovery and the existence of Mussolini's secret program. He then made an even more explosive claim, one that completed the narrative circle. He alleged that after the war, the Vatican played a crucial and pivotal role as a secret intermediary. They secretly informed the Allied powers, specifically the American intelligence services like the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which was the direct precursor to the CIA, about the existence of the retrieved Italian craft and the associated scientific data. He claimed that the physical craft, or at least a significant portion of its wreckage and technology, was eventually transferred from Vatican control to the Americans. This secret transfer, Grush alleges, is what kickstarted the United States' own covert reverse engineering programs in the late 1940s. In this telling, the Roswell incident was not the beginning of the American program. It was just the first time the Americans managed to get a craft of their own directly. The foundational knowledge, the initial, world-shattering proof that they were not alone, came from the secret that had been preserved and then passed on by the Holy See. This testimony is a game-changer for the theory. It takes a story that was once based on a set of disputed, anonymous documents and elevates it, claiming it is a known, albeit deeply hidden, secret within the highest levels of the U.S. intelligence community. It provides a direct, causal link between the 1933 Magenta crash, the Vatican's secret custodianship, and the entire 70-plus-year history of the American UFO cover-up. The narrative is now complete, startlingly coherent, and championed by a source with impeccable credentials. A craft crashes in Italy. Mussolini's regime studies it in secret. As the regime collapses, the secret is entrusted to the neutral Vatican for safekeeping. After the war, the Vatican, seeing the rise of a new global power in the democratic United States and perhaps fearing the rise of atheistic communism in the Soviet Union, decides that the secret is safer with the Americans. They facilitate a clandestine transfer of the technology and data, effectively passing the torch of the great secret from the old world to the new. The Vatican's motive, in this complex scenario, could be seen as a mix of pragmatism and theology. It could have been a pragmatic geopolitical move, an attempt to build a relationship with and gain favor from the new dominant Western power. Or it could have been a deeply theological one. Perhaps the Church believed that this revelation, if it were ever to come, should be stewarded by a democratic and, at the time, largely God-fearing nation like the United States, rather than being discovered by a totalitarian or atheistic regime. Whatever the motive, the Vatican's alleged role is pivotal. It becomes the silent broker, the keeper of the secret during the world's darkest hour, and the entity that ensures its continuity into the post-war, Cold War era. David Grush's testimony has placed the Vatican at the very epicenter of the modern UFO mystery. He has publicly and, in classified briefings to Congress, privately laid out a version of history that is almost too incredible to believe. He has essentially accused the Holy See of being a key player in a multi-decade, global conspiracy of silence, a conspiracy to hide the single greatest truth in human history from the public. The question is no longer just a matter of obscure Italian folklore or disputed documents from an anonymous source. It is now a matter of a high-level intelligence whistleblower making a direct and specific claim, a claim that points a finger directly at the highest levels of the Catholic Church. The secret of Magenta is no longer just a UFO story. It has become a full-blown Vatican conspiracy. And it forces us to confront a deeply unsettling question. What other secrets, what other truths about our world and our place in the cosmos might be resting, silent and unseen, within those ancient Roman vaults? The narrative we have constructed is one of the most explosive and paradigm-shifting in the entire history of ufology. It presents a coherent, chronological account that begins with a strange, bell-shaped craft that fell from the Italian sky, moves to the formation of a top-secret scientific study group led by a Nobel laureate, and culminates in a clandestine handover of world-changing technology to the Vatican, a secret finally dragged into the light by a high-ranking intelligence whistleblower. It is a story so compelling, so filled with intriguing details and powerful, resonant names like Mussolini, Marconi, and Pope Pius XII, that it feels as if it must be true. It has the satisfying click of a final puzzle piece falling into place, the hidden history that explains everything that came after. But in any serious investigation into the unknown, especially one with such profound implications, skepticism is not a weakness. It is our most essential and powerful tool. It is our responsibility to turn the same critical, unforgiving eye that we used on the conventional historical narrative onto the conspiracy theory itself. And when we do, when we subject this incredible story to the rigorous pressures of historical and forensic analysis, we find that the case, for all its seductive allure, is built not upon a foundation of rock, but upon a foundation of shadows, silence, and profoundly questionable evidence. The entire, sprawling edifice of the 1933 Magenta crash story, with all its subsequent chapters, rests on a single, critical foundation: the set of documents that have become known as the fascist UFO files. These are the supposed internal memos, the secret telegrams, the official reports, all of which were allegedly smuggled out of Italy by the anonymous family member of a long-dead scientist from the secret Gabinetto RS/33. Without these documents, the story is nothing more than a rumor, an unsubstantiated piece of 20th century folklore. They are the smoking gun, the tangible proof that is meant to transform the tale from a myth into a verifiable historical event. The single biggest, most insurmountable problem for this entire theory, therefore, is that a significant number of independent researchers, professional historians, and forensic document analysts who have examined the files are thoroughly convinced that they are not genuine. They believe they are a clever, sophisticated, and elaborate modern hoax. The arguments against the authenticity of these files are numerous, specific, and detailed. Skeptics who have pored over the documents have pointed out a host of anomalies and red flags that are difficult to ignore. For instance, the language used in some of the memos has been described as feeling jarringly modern. It contains turns of phrase, technical jargon, and a style of prose that seem out of place for the stilted, formal, and often convoluted nature of Italian bureaucratic correspondence in the 1930s. The tone feels less like a genuine historical document and more like a modern writer's attempt to imitate one. The physical formatting of the documents has also come under intense fire. The layout of the text, the specific typefaces used by the typewriters, and the placement of official stamps and signatures have, in some cases, been shown to be inconsistent with known, authenticated fascist-era documents from the very same ministries and time periods. These may seem like small, pedantic details, but in the world of forensic document analysis, they are critical. A successful forger can get the big picture, write the letterhead, the general idea, but it is often in the small, mundane, and almost unconscious details of bureaucratic procedure and material culture that their work is exposed. The inconsistencies suggest a forger working from a template, but one who lacked a perfect understanding of the subtle protocols of the time. Even more damning, in our digital age, some researchers claim to have found evidence of direct digital manipulation. When analyzing the high-resolution digital copies of the documents that have circulated online, they have identified what appear to be suspicious digital artifacts, microscopic inconsistencies in pixelation and background texture that suggest the documents were created or altered using modern software like Adobe Photoshop. The claim is that a forger likely obtained genuine, blank fascist-era letterhead which is not particularly difficult to find in archives or flea markets in Italy, and then digitally superimpose the explosive text and forge signatures onto it. This technique would create a file that looks, at first glance, remarkably authentic, but which betrays its modern origins upon close, technological inspection. Finally, the provenance of the documents, that is, their documented history, their chain of custody, and their origines deeply and hopelessly problematic. The story of an anonymous source, a mysterious heir, passing on a relative's secret files is a classic, almost cliché, trope in the world of conspiracy theories. It is a narrative device that is, by its very nature, impossible to verify. There is no named source to interview, no family history to check, no way to independently confirm the existence of the supposed RS/33 member or his role in the government. The entire origin story relies on a foundation of complete, unverifiable anonymity, which means we, as investigators, are simply asked to take it on faith. For any historian or serious journalist, an anonymous source presenting an incredible story with documents of questionable authenticity is not just a red flag, it is a full stop sign. The consensus among many mainstream historians, and even a large number of skeptical UFO researchers, is that the fascist UFO files are almost certainly a forgery. The most likely scenario is that the documents were created sometime in the 1990s by a person or group with a deep knowledge of both UFO lore and Italian history. Their specific goal would have been to provide a solid historical backbone for the then-fledgling rumor of a pre-Roswell crash. It was a clever attempt to create a founding myth for Italian ufology, a story that would give the country a unique and central place in the global UFO mystery. If these foundational documents are indeed a hoax, then the entire, elaborate story they tell off Mussolini's secret cabinet, of Marconi's deep involvement, of the systematic, decade-long study of a retrieved craft collapses into dust. The entire narrative is built on a foundation of sand. This leads us to the second major pillar of skepticism, the profound, absolute, and unbroken silence of the one institution that supposedly sits at the very heart of this grand conspiracy, the Vatican. According to the theory, the Holy See has been the secret custodian of this world-changing truth since the chaotic days of the 1940s. They are said to be in possession of, or at least have intimate, documented knowledge of, retrieved non-human technology, and possibly even the biologics of its pilots. If this were true, it would be, without any hyperbole, the single most important and explosive secret the Catholic Church has ever kept in its 2,000-year history. It would dwarf any other controversy or hidden scandal. And yet, in the 80 years since this alleged handover took place, there has never been a single, credible, verifiable leak from within the Vatican to support this claim. The Vatican is an ancient and famously secretive institution, but it is not a perfect, monolithic machine. It is a complex human organization and sprawling bureaucracy made up of thousands of individual priests, bishops, cardinals, scholars, archivists, librarians, and lay staff. Over the course of 8 decades, it seems almost inconceivable that a secret of this magnitude could be kept without a single slip-up. Not one deathbed confession from a guilt-ridden cardinal? Not one disgruntled cleric smuggling out a photograph or a document? Not one whisper passed from a Vatican archivist to a trusted historian? And yet, there has been nothing. Only silence. Absolute, deafening silence. Critics of the theory argue that this complete and total silence is not evidence of a flawlessly executed, multi-generational conspiracy. It is, they contend, overwhelming evidence that there is simply no secret to keep. This argument is strengthened by the Vatican's surprisingly open public posture on the topic of extraterrestrial life in recent years. The Vatican Observatory, which is staffed by highly respected Jesuit astronomers, has become a leading voice in the emerging field of astrobiology. They have hosted international scientific conferences and published serious academic papers on the potential theological and societal implications of discovering life beyond Earth. High-ranking figures, including the Pope's chief astronomer, have publicly and repeatedly stated that believing in the possibility of alien life does not, in any way, contradict Catholic faith. The director of the Vatican Observatory, Brother Guy Consolmagno, has even playfully said he would be delighted to baptize an alien if it asked. This open-minded, intellectually curious public stance seems deeply at odds with the idea that the same institution is simultaneously hiding the hard, physical evidence of alien visitation. If they were truly sitting on such a world-shattering secret, would they be so willing to publicly and cheerfully entertain the idea? Or would they enforce a strict, top-down policy of absolute silence and denial on the topic at all levels, fearing that any public discussion might inadvertently lead someone closer to the truth? The cognitive dissonance between their public openness and their alleged secret-keeping is, for many skeptics, a bridge too far. Furthermore, there is the simple, practical, logistical problem. Where would one hide a crashed spaceship, even a relatively small one, within the confines of Vatican City? The Vatican is the smallest independent state in the world, a walled enclave covering a mere 110 acres. While its ancient buildings contain many vaults, basements, and storerooms, it is not a sprawling military complex like Area 51, with vast, secret underground hangars. The Vatican's secret archives, while famously extensive, are designed to hold paper, parchment, and vellum, not large pieces of exotic machinery. Any attempt to store a physical object of that size and importance within the Vatican's limited and heavily trafficked territory would be a logistical nightmare, risking discovery by the thousands of people who live and work there every single day. While hiding a secret document is plausible, hiding a physical craft for 80 years seems almost impossible. The lack of a credible storage location, combined with the 80 years of unbroken silence, makes the Vatican's alleged role in this story, for many skeptics, the weakest and most unbelievable link in the entire chain. This brings us to our final, and perhaps most important, area of skepticism, which is to question the entire narrative itself and ask if it is not a genuine hidden history, but a beautifully constructed modern myth. A compelling story, it's worth remembering, does not need to be true. It just needs to feel true. And the story of the 1933 Italian UFO crash is a masterfully constructed narrative that speaks directly to the core beliefs, desires, and biases of the modern conspiracy culture. Consider, for a moment, what the story accomplishes from a narrative standpoint. Firstly, it provides a much-needed missing link in UFO lore. It authoritatively pushes the timeline of the government cover-up back before the iconic Roswell event, giving the entire phenomenon a deeper, more established, and more international history. It neatly connects the UFO mystery to some of the most dramatic and mythologized figures and events of the 20th century: a rise of fascism under Mussolini, the scientific genius of Marconi, the chaos of World War II, and the dawn of the nuclear age. It creates a grand, unified theory of ufology, with fascist Italy as the secret starting point and the United States as the chosen inheritor of the Great Secret. It's a story that makes the entire UFO phenomenon feel bigger, older, and more significant. Secondly, it taps directly into one of the most powerful and enduring conspiracy tropes of all, the idea of the Vatican as the ultimate secret keeper of forbidden knowledge. For centuries, the Vatican has been the subject of popular theories claiming that it is hiding everything from the Holy Grail and the lost Gospels to the descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. The idea that they are also hiding a crashed UFO and alien bodies fits perfectly and seamlessly into this pre-existing narrative framework. It confirms a bias that many people already hold, that the Catholic Church is an ancient, powerful, and secretive institution that is not telling us the full truth about the nature of the world. And finally, we have the recent, explosive testimony of David Grush. While his credentials are truly impressive and his public testimony has forced a new level of seriousness in the official conversation about UAPs, it is critically important to remember precisely what he is and is not saying. Grush is, by his own account, a whistleblower. He is repeating, in good faith, what he has been told by his high-level sources within the intelligence community. He has not, at any point, claimed to have seen the crashed Italian craft or the non-human biologics himself. He is reporting on the existence of a story or a belief that is held within these deeply compartmented, secret programs. This is a crucial distinction. It is entirely possible that the story of the 1933 crash and the subsequent Vatican handover is a piece of internal lore, a founding myth that has been circulating within these secret programs for decades, its truth taken for granted by those on the inside, but without any solid, first-hand, verifiable proof to back it up. Grush could be accurately and honestly reporting on a well-established, but ultimately false internal narrative. The story's existence as a belief within the intelligence community does not automatically make the story itself a historical fact. It is possible, then, that the entire narrative is a modern myth, a compelling story created in the late 20th century to perfectly fit a pre-existing belief system. It expertly combines the public's fascination with World War II secrets, the deep-seated mystique of the Vatican, and the enduring allure of the UFO phenomenon into a single, cohesive, and deeply satisfying package. It is a story that feels historically grounded, scientifically plausible, and conspiratorially thrilling. But it may, in the end, be just that, a story. A powerful and persistent one, now elevated to the halls of Congress and the front pages of newspapers, but a story nonetheless, whose foundations, upon close and skeptical inspection, seem to be made more of shadow and speculation than of solid, verifiable fact. And so, we are left suspended in a state of profound and unsettling ambiguity. On one hand, we have the explosive, on-the-record claims of a credible intelligence insider, pointing to a hidden history that could rewrite everything we know about our technology, our history, and our place in the universe. On the other hand, we have a case built on a foundation of almost certainly forged documents and 80 years of complete and total institutional silence. Is the story of the 1933 Magenta crash and the Vatican cover-up the greatest secret ever kept, a truth so profound that it has been hidden from humanity for nearly a century? Or is it one of the greatest hoaxes ever perpetrated, a modern myth so cleverly constructed that it has successfully masqueraded as history, even fooling high-level intelligence officials? The evidence, as it stands, is too thin to convict, but the story, as it is told, is too compelling to simply dismiss. It remains a perfect conspiracy theory, a shadowy enigma locked in a vault of secrets, real or imagined, in the heart of Rome. The story of the 1933 Italian UFO crash places the Vatican at the center of the greatest secret in modern history. It's a tantalizing tale of a crashed alien craft, a secret fascist science unit, and a clandestine handover to the Holy See. While fueled by explosive whistleblower testimony, the case rests on a foundation of disputed documents and official silence, leaving us to wonder, is this the hidden truth that rewrites history, or a masterfully crafted modern conspiracy? Thanks for exploring with Ancient Relics Keeper. What mystery should we unravel next? Like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Let's keep digging into history's secrets together.